Okay, guys, good morning. Hi, Violetta, everybody else. Welcome back. Just hanging out with Eddie here to get the meeting started, I guess. But we have another minute, really, and then we'll get the actual lecture underway. Eddie. Hi, Brianna, Delilah. Good morning, everyone. Hey. Morning. Hope you're all doing well. Caleb, Jesse, AJ, Veronica, Isabel, Sky, Leslie, John, Ryan, Dan. Hey. Eddie. Ryan, Roheen, Angel, welcome back. Eddie, that's my coffee. Good morning. Okay, so now that we're pretty much here at 8:30, I'll just gradually get us underway and get started. Thanks again, as usual, for all of your guys' attendance and your hard work and dedication throughout the whole semester. It's obviously it's a long semester anyway, but especially with the pandemic going on and all the other kind of complications that have to come with that. It's been a tough year overall for a lot of people, but I think you guys have done really well, and you'll end up being, I think, better off and stronger in the end for all of that. But we are coming close to the end, obviously. Today we have the last lecture on material from our book, and then next week we're just going to have 2 review sessions to get you ready for the final exam. I'm going to be distributing the study guide for the final later today or very soon. I have another class meeting after this, and then I'll try to send it around. So you can start looking at the study guide and getting your notes ready to go. But anyway, yeah, today's the last time that we will have any kind of new material. 2 review sessions next week. Also next week, your 4th and final homework assignment is due. And then you'll have the final. So you're really down to the last 2 things, homework number 4 and the final exam. And we'll take all the time next week to just try and get ready for the upcoming final. To those that have emailed me asking for grades, I'm working through all the emails. I'm sorry there's been a slight delay this week just because it's a little bit of a more busy, hectic week than I thought, getting my car back and getting the repairs done to the window that was broken and stuff. But not to worry, I'm definitely going through all those messages and responding to them in the order I received them. And I'll be done, I think, today with all of them. So you'll be getting your answer soon if you ask for any grades. And if you didn't yet, please do email me at your leisure, and I'll be in touch with you through the weekend to report grades back to anybody who wants them. Okay, so hopefully that stuff is all clear and those topics are all easy enough for us to understand. So then we have one more meeting on ethics today. That's chapter 9. So let's go ahead and just get into it, and then we'll be done with all the notes that we need for our whole class. And as usual, guys, feel free to leave any kind of comment, ask any kind of question anytime, even if it's just to note that you were present at the meeting, or if you have any things you want me to stop, explain more, or to repeat. Okay, then, so here we go, back to chapter 9, which is all about ethics. Let me just summarize some of the points that we covered last time, and then we'll be able to continue from there. So within ethics, we talk about morality, the moral side of life, what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, what is a good thing that you ought to do or not, that you ought to not do, what's justice, injustice, virtue, vice. So that whole range of topics, no, Eddie's about to jump into the computer. That whole range of topics is the realm of ethics. And sometimes we look at actions and we classify them into the different moral categories: morally impermissible, morally permissible, morally obligatory. Sometimes we engage in moral reasoning, which is when we make our own judgments and decisions about what's right or wrong, or about what we think we should or shouldn't do morally. We talked about the difference between moral and non-moral values. Moral values, values that benefit you and others, but they're also considered good in and of themselves, even when they don't lead to any practical benefit outcome, like forgiveness or justice or compassion. There's also non-moral values, which are values that are more self-interested and goal-oriented. They're used as a means to an end. Think of like fame or popularity or prestige. And you should, I guess, have a balance of both types of value in your life, according to some reasonable scientific studies, and also I think just common sense. And then we talked about the conscience. The conscience is like this internal source of knowledge about what's right and wrong. It tries to steer you away from bad behavior, or at least alert you to the fact that there's a morally relevant situation that you're perceiving or that you're involved in. And the conscience sometimes reveals to us our moral sentiments, which are these emotions we can feel that alert us to moral situations and cause us to want to do what's right. A couple of them that we talked about, these moral sentiments, we have helper's high. That's a good feeling that results from helping people. There's empathy, the ability to understand and care about the feelings of others. Compassion would be when you take action to relieve other people's unhappiness or to care for them. Moral tragedy, when you make a bad moral decision that you later regret. Moral outrage, when you perceive or witness something that's unjust in the world and then you become upset because of it. And resentment, which is similar, but the only difference is that with resentment, you yourself are one of the victims of the bad, unjust treatment, and therefore it's a little more personal. We also distinguish between guilt and shame. Guilt is a bad feeling that comes from the recognition that you've done something wrong and it makes you want to correct the wrong. And shame is a bad feeling that just results from violating some kind of social norm or expectation. But you can feel shame without guilt, as we discussed last time, if you're doing something that steps outside of like a social expectation or standard, but you don't really think that it's immoral in and of itself. Like, I don't know, if your parents all expected you to take on a certain profession and you take on a different one that's disappointing, I guess, to them, you might feel shame for kind of being outside of the expectations of your family and parents, but you might not feel guilt if you don't really think that this is a wrong moral decision. Okay, we talked after that about the development of moral reasoning, which in the book, based on the research of the psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg, he said that there were 3 overall stages of your moral development. And so the basic 3 stages are like pre-conventional, conventional, and then post-conventional. In the pre-conventional stage, which is the earliest and the most basic, like the way that even children think about morality, morality is all just about avoiding punishment. So whether something's wrong or right, the only question that a pre-conventional moral thinker cares about is, could I get in trouble for doing this? So they may stick with the moral rules and expectations, but only because they're afraid of what could happen if they deviate from it in terms of being held accountable or somehow being penalized. When you go a little further from that, you get to the conventional stage, which is not so much about avoiding punishment, but seeking approval from your peers and from your society's norms. So in the conventional stage, you try to fit into the norms and conventions of society in order to be seen as like a good person, a good boy or a nice girl. And so in that case, you really care more about the norms and standards of society and just fitting in. But then if you go all the way through to the post-conventional stage, you realize that it's not about just avoiding punishment. It's also not just about fitting in. It's about living according to a set of universal moral principles that you really do believe in. And once you apply these moral principles to facts and situations, sometimes your conclusions will even be different from the prevailing majority or consensus view of society. Like think of, for example, people who objected to slavery during the time when that was like the prevailing status quo. So when you get to the post-conventional level, you realize that even social conventions and laws need to have moral justification. And so that's the process, pre-conventional and post-conventional. After that, and this is really where we kind of finished with our time on Tuesday, we started to just briefly talk about what are different kinds of moral theories. And so really that's what we're going to zoom in on today and just focus on for the whole class period today, which is what are some different moral theories. Now, a moral theory in the first place is an attempt to try and describe the parameters that make an action right or wrong. You might be wondering, is there any kind of precise way of identifying whether an action is wrong or right or even obligatory? Well, different moral theories attempt to try and at least provide some criteria or some standards that would allow us to make moral judgment and moral classification. So there are two types of moral theory, and I think this will just be bringing us back into where we finished last time. Two types of moral theory. Okay, so we have moral relativism and, on the other hand, moral universalism. Okay. Now, according to moral relativism, morality is relative. It's not universal or absolute. And according to moral universalism, it's not relative. It is absolute and universal. So morality is universal. Now, underneath the heading of moral relativism, we can further subdivide it into two categories. So there's two different types of moral relativism. You've got ethical subjectivism and what ethical subjectivism says, if you can remember, is that morality is nothing more than each person's personal opinion. So that's like the most radically subjectivist moral relativist view. Morality is just personal opinion. So that's one type of relativism, ethical subjectivism. And a different possible relativistic theory is cultural relativism, which says that it's not really the individual who determines morality, but it's the society that they're a part of as a whole. So morality depends on social norms, is what cultural relativism says. Now, I think we might have talked a little bit about this at the end last time, but I want to come back to this and make sure it's clear. Let me ask some of you guys, okay, if ethical subjectivism was true, or just consider the concept of ethical subjectivism, can you tell me what might be seen as like a criticism of that? Or what could be the problem with a view which says morality is just individual opinion, just a personal opinion of each person? Can you tell me what might be the problem with affirming that, with saying that morality is just personal opinion? Why could that be wrong? Or what kind of scary, dangerous, not okay things could that possibly imply? Tell me about this. Can you tell me a reason to find fault with ethical subjectivism, the viewpoint that morality is nothing other than a personal opinion? What's wrong with that? I'll just give you some time to say it and type it into the chat, but I want you to tell me what you think. What is wrong with ethical subjectivism? Because there is a problem. I think we've talked about it, but it's also just kind of common sense. Like, why would it be not okay or maybe wrong to think that ethics is just personal opinion? Why? Okay, yeah, so there you go, Violetta, very correct. It could apply to dangerous things such as murder. And it could imply that if the murderer, if the killer believes that that's not wrong, then we can't even really say that that they're incorrect. We would just have to say, well, there is no fact about whether murder is wrong. Most people think it is, but then you've got a couple of weirdos that don't, and I guess we just have to have different opinions. But that's kind of weak, isn't it? You don't want to just say murder, rape, genocide, torture, the Holocaust or something, that these are just matters of opinion, and we can have our different opinions. It doesn't really seem to many people like that's an opinion that you can have that's valid. It's not okay to murder, no matter even if anybody thinks so. And And therefore, the problem with ethical subjectivism is it does not allow us to make a strong moral criticism of a person's behavior or judgment. If a person thought that rape was not wrong, then all we could say is, according to them, it isn't, and according to us, it is. But most of us would probably prefer to say something stronger than that, like the deviant, psychopathic pervert that wants to rape people or kill people is doing something that is objectively wrong, not just in my opinion, but like wrong, period, in and of itself. Absolutely so. So ethical subjectivism suffers from the limitation that we can only say that morality is an opinion, and therefore when really bad things are happening, it deprives us of the capacity to say that it's objectively wrong. Now, cultural relativism maybe is a little better, because if you are like some kind of deviant, murderer within a culture that disapproves of murder, then we would still say it was wrong, because the individual's opinion doesn't set the boundaries of morality, but now it's the social norm, the social standard. But there still are issues with cultural relativism. Maybe anybody here could try and tell me that. Can you think about that question? What could be the possible criticism? Why do you think somebody might say, I do not agree with cultural relativism, that I don't think that's the really correct way of looking at morality? What could be the possible objection or fault that you could find with cultural relativism? What's wrong with saying that morality is defined by culture? Because, it's kind of similar to what you just said about the ethical subjectivist point. But now let's do that again with cultural relativism. What's wrong with cultural relativism? At least some could argue. Let's see it. Let me know. Cultural relativism. What's the problem? I know a lot of you are like, there's no problem. That's true. That's just what the facts are of morality. But come on, get into a different headspace. Think about what somebody would say that is wrong with cultural relativism. Just takes a second, but let me hear it. Okay, well, Gabriel, you say that it restricts people. Not sure if I understand what you do mean. How's that a criticism? Of course, morality restricts people, but I don't know what you really mean. I wasn't really fishing around for that point, really, but maybe if you could explain it more, I could understand it. Anybody else? Okay, so Ashley, you're saying one culture's tradition could be another's disrespect. Still not going far enough, Ashley. I think some of you guys just don't want to make a cultural criticism. Violetta, you say promotes a lack of diversity? This is getting it totally backwards. Not really, because it would actually indicate that you're supposed to give total respect to all the different cultures, whether they disagree with you or not, about what's right and wrong. So it would sort of, I would think, promote a recognition that there are more than one culture and that there are different moral standards. So it's kind of too diverse would be the problem, I think, but let's hear you say it. Everyone's culture is different and they all believe something different. Okay, this is getting a little closer, Roxana, but I still detect resistance to making the correct point, because I think maybe some of you are just you don't like the sound of saying a whole culture could be wrong. Do you know what I'm talking about? A whole culture could be doing something evil. A whole culture can believe that something that is evil is not evil. Does this make sense to you? Can you understand that there are cultures in the world right now that will execute you just for standing against the government? That there are cultures in the world that will, kill you if you're gay, or that there are cultures in the world where children could be sacrificed to the gods as like an offering to the gods. Now, you might hear that, and you've had so much postmodernism put into you that you're like, well, I can't judge that. That's a different culture. Maybe they don't do it the way we do it, but it's not fair to judge. But let's try and look at it differently. Let's consider the possibility that that's actually wrong. Like if a culture is practicing slavery and they believe in it, like our own culture used to do, we were doing something wrong. It wasn't okay just because everyone accepted it. Just like it's not okay even if there are cultures in the world that are backwards, that are killing off gay people just for, expressing their whatever orientation. So the problem is that according to cultural relativism, you cannot say that a whole culture is doing anything wrong, because all you're doing is judging it from outside of their culture, which according to cultural relativism, there's no universal standard of morality. So if you want to say something more like those cultural practices are immoral, period, like in the universal absolute sense, they're immoral and there's no relativism about it, then you have to reach for moral universalism. Because if you think there's anything that's actually just downright wrong, and it's not okay, even if a whole society believed it was okay, then you still couldn't hold cultural relativism. So it's like the problem with ethical subjectivism, just on a larger scale. You don't want to say to a perverted rapist, like, okay, well, we have a difference of opinion on rape, and there's no fact about whether it's wrong. And so you probably should also look at it as, we don't want to have like a so-called difference of opinion with a culture that's going to like kill children or something for no good reason, and just say, well, that's a different cultural practice and a different set of ethical norms. So Violetta, if on the test we're asked to put an example, will we just name a dangerous culture such as sacrificing children? Well, Violetta, I mean, there's so many different examples, but yes, you would simply point out that there are some actions that seem to us to be universally wrong, and according to cultural relativism, we can never say that anything is universally wrong. It just depends on the culture. So you always have to qualify any statement, like it's wrong according to America, or it's wrong according to, you know, Europe or Asia or something like that. But if you think that there are some things that are just wrong in and of themselves across the board for everybody, then you don't have the ability to say that in cultural relativism. And some things do seem downright wrong for anyone to do, regardless of what their assumptions might be. Caleb, it separates humanity by culture to justify unethical practices. I don't know. I'm not necessarily, like, the person who believes in cultural relativism is kind of just like skeptical of the objective basis of ethics. Like I think many young people and postmodern people living in this time are. You look at ethics as something that just comes from, you know, your parents or your community, and that means that a lot of people are already in the mindset that relativism is true. But the problem with it, if you want to be critical, is to try and understand that this could give license to actions that are fundamentally immoral, as long as there was a culture that thought it was okay. Okay, so anyway then, we have to now speak more about moral universalism, because moral universalism is a major contrast with either of these. In moral universalism, morality is not subjective. It's not relative to anything. It's universal. It's universal, absolute, and it's the same for all people, all places, and for all time. So if you believe there's like some kind of objective moral law that's not different from here to there, from one to one, and from one to another, then you go with moral universalism. But we have to now explain what are some different versions of moral universalist theory. So let's go over those. There's two major ones in the West that are kind of the most, I think, dominant in the literature. And so you have, here we go, moral universalist theories. Okay, moral universalist theories. Now, one of them is the theory that is called utilitarianism. Okay, utilitarianism is an ethical theory that traces back to some British philosophers of the 18th and 19th century, and then on into the current day. And one of the major figures that's kind of a forefather of the whole system is this man named John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill lived from 1806 until 1873. And he was a British philosopher and an economist. He also served in the British Parliament for a while in his life. So he was also a member of the government, because Parliament is like the equivalent of US Congress. And he had a whole bunch of interesting views, and he left behind a lot of interesting writings that have been classics now in the field of philosophy. In terms of his own ethical and political perspectives, he would be what we call today like a libertarian, meaning that he thought that there should be limited government, and that the government should have the least power that is needed to simply maintain social order, but no more than that. And so he would have been a person, for example, that says self-regarding conduct that does not affect other people's interests should be tolerated under the law. So he didn't think government should be able to interfere with people's private decisions, whether to take or gamble or to seek prostitutes or something. So as long as it's just a self-regarding act, even if it's perhaps self-destructive, it's to be allowed under the law, because we should respect people's freedom to make their own decisions as long as it doesn't affect others. So he had that whole idea of libertarianism, but he also would have been a progressive, as we call it, in many other areas too. Like he believed in the universal elimination of slavery and the emancipation of, or the women's suffrage at a time when women were not allowed to vote in many places, including the United States, until 1920. He had an interesting range of views, but what he's probably most well known for and his real academic legacy are his writings on ethics and his statement of utilitarian theory. So let me just say to you what utilitarianism is in a basic nutshell. There's a lot you could say, but I'll try to give you the bare bones at least so you know some facts. Utilitarianism is this view. It says the following. If you want to do the right thing, it says to you to try to always take the action that's going to lead to the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. Okay, so it says as follows: act always to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. Okay, so utilitarianism. Act always to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So if you were a utilitarian and if you were kind of trying to live according to this ethical standard, then what you would always be trying to do would be to, like, when you're about to do something and you're thinking, I want to do the right thing, you'd have to consider what your options are, take stock of your options, and then you would have to game out how much total happiness would be caused by each of these different options. And whichever one you think would generate the most overall happiness for all affected, then that would be your moral obligation to do that thing. And the other actions, the other options that would generate less total happiness, then those actions would be morally impermissible by comparison. Okay, so as some say, this is a consequentialist ethical theory, which means that it bases morality on the consequences of what you do. Consequences are the results that come from whatever actions that you take. And every action has some number of consequences, whether they're small or large. Don't think of consequences only in the negative sense. I know that sometimes you hear the word and you think of, like, consequences are punishment for doing bad things. Like, oh, will I face consequences if I cheat? And yes, there can be bad consequences, but there could be good ones too, right? Suppose that you help a friend study for a big exam, and then because you help them, a positive consequence is that they do well on the test. Or another example, suppose that you stay up with a friend drinking and partying the night before their exam, and that makes it so that they're not physically, in the greatest state, and they don't do their exam well, and that would be a bad consequence of that action. So utilitarians say, estimate the probable consequences of each option that you could take, and simply select the one that would result in the greatest overall balance of pleasure for all affected. Okay? Now, according to the utilitarian ethical system, we're supposed to always be acting with a view towards maximizing total human happiness. And let me just say a word quickly about what this is based on. So he says utilitarianism is somewhat founded on another principle. So here's like a principle that's supposed to give support to utilitarian theory. He calls it the greatest happiness principle. Okay, so the greatest happiness principle is supposed to be like a reason why utilitarianism is correct or why it sounds plausible. And all the principle says is that actions are right to the extent that they promote happiness, and actions are wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse of happiness. So here's what that says. And sort of parallel to that, actions are wrong to the extent, to the degree that they promote the reverse of happiness. Okay, actions are right to the extent that they promote happiness. Actions are wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse. And what the principle just says then is that when you do anything, and if it creates happiness, not just for yourself, but for others too, then the more and more happiness the action causes to happen, the better and better that we think it is morally. And, reverse, if you do an action that does not create happiness, but instead the opposite of that, then that's bad. And the more of it that does, then the worse that it is. Now, let's consider for a moment the meaning of the terms they're using here, happiness and the reverse of happiness. You may think happiness is like something that's intangible, very hard to define. But in utilitarian theory, it's actually something quite straightforward. Happiness, they say, is just pleasure in the absence of pain. So anyway, here I'll put that down so we can see it clearly. Happiness is pleasure and the absence of pain. Okay, pleasure in the absence of pain. So now I'll ask you this. Can you perhaps deduce what the reverse of that would be, just based on that wording? If happiness is pleasure and the absence of pain, then the reverse of happiness is what and what? Can you state the converse of that? Because that's the definition we want here. The reverse of happiness. What is the reverse of pleasure and the absence of pain? It's something in the absence of something else. So what do you think this other definition should say? Let me hear that. What's the converse of pleasure in the absence of pain? And a hint for you is that it's a sentence that sounds like blank and the absence of blank. So what's that? There you go, very good. Yes, it's pain in the absence of pleasure. So now that we have a very clear fix on what happiness and the reverse are, you can consider the greatest happiness principle in more depth. And so all it really says is that when you perform any act, it's going to be considered morally right to the extent that it promotes pleasure or takes pain away. And if you do something that creates instead pain or takes pleasure away, then that's thought to be wrong. And the more of it that does, then the worse and worse that it is. So I don't know, if I was a person who, I rushed into a burning building to try and rescue people inside that were trapped and that could not access the exit. And say, going into this smoke-filled, dangerous environment when I'm bringing people out to safety, I saved one person. So by saving their life, I prevented them from losing all the pleasure that they would have experienced in the remainder of their whole life, because if they had died in the fire right then depending on their age and how much experience they've already had, there's so many things they would never get to do. Like they might not ever get to get married, have a family, travel the world, see their kids grow up, witness the future, start a business, fulfill their other projects and goals, complete their education. So if a person is allowed to die through the fire, then that's all the pleasure that they don't get to have. And so by rescuing them, you secure all of that. And if you save one, it's a great, good, noble act. If you save 2, 3, 4, 5, then your act seems like it's just getting better and better morally. On the other hand, if you're the person that lit the fire, okay, you're the arsonist, and you're causing people to either die or take on injuries, then that means you're creating pain, or whatever pleasure they were going to have, you're taking it away. And so if you did that and you hurt one person or killed them, that would be a horrible thing and a bad thing. But if you did it to 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not like the numbers don't matter. It's getting worse and worse the more in pain that you're causing or the more happiness that you're taking away. So for John Stuart Mill, this is just something that's obviously true that we can all recognize. We want pleasure. We don't want pain. And so when you do things that cause more overall pleasure or take pain away, that's good. Or when you do things that cause pain, this is bad. And as a further basis of support for all of that, he offers one more quick statement, and I want us to know what that is and understand it too. So he says, to anybody who wants further backing for this idea, sorry, let me turn my pages back here a little bit. He says, to anybody who wants a little bit further support for this, let me ask you to consider the following point here. That important principle stated by Mill, happiness or pleasure, because it's the same to him, so I'll just put slash. Happiness slash pleasure, he says, is the only thing that we all pursue as an end and not as a means. And he says, since this is true, this gives even greater reason to be a utilitarian. But to understand it, let's go into these words means and ends so that we know what the real statement is saying. Okay, so we're going to define and understand what the word end means in this philosophical, ethical sense, and what means are. So, the words means and end, I think you probably already do have some kind of current understanding of them, but it'll just take us a moment to kind of recall that. So let me try and guide you through that by asking you about a common phrase that many people hear and have heard before. Have you ever heard the saying that the ends justify the means? Maybe some of you have heard that. It's a popular idiom of everyday speech. The ends justify the means. Now, if that was stated, what do you think that means? Can you give me an explanation of that phrase in more, in more fulsome description? Like, what does it actually mean to say that the ends justify the means? Can you express the meaning of that statement in other words? Let me see you try. If you've heard the statement before, if you think you have a working comprehension of it, then maybe you can tell me what it is to claim that the ends justify the means. What does this say? Any of you that think you might have a sense of it, go ahead and let's just see if we can work with what you know. To claim the ends justify the means is to make what claim? Okay, so thanks, Nicole. You say that the outcome justifies what it took to get there. And yeah, that's very good. That's pretty much it. So when you say the ends justify the means, that's what you're saying. You're saying that if I have a result that's worthy enough and important enough, then whatever I had to do to achieve it kind of becomes justified or okay. And sometimes people say this when they think they have to do things that are a little bit unsavory, but they're doing it for like a really, really important reason. Suppose that someone had to protect their children, but in order to do that, they had to, I don't know, tell a lie. Maybe they had to lie to a family member because they think this family member will be harmful to their children. And they don't like lying. You know, they have a view that lying is generally wrong to do. But they're going to lie to this family member because they think if they don't, that they might end up bringing harm to the children. So they say, you know, protecting my children was the goal. And since that was the goal, it justifies, you know, the means justify, the ends justify the means here. The end, the goal of protecting their well-being justifies the means that I took to that end, which was to act dishonestly. Maybe somebody, I don't know, believes that if they tell their boss, maybe this is not the best example, but you kind of understand, right? If there was, you can come up with your own if you like as well. But if there's something that you really think is important as a goal, then you might think that it's okay to do certain things in the achievement of that goal, even if they're not usually approved of kind of actions. Maybe let's see, ends justify the means. So like, what's a really valuable goal that a person might do something a little shady to get there, but they think it was okay just because of the goal? Can you think of any action like that? I just sort of gave you one where it's like you protect your children by lying. Or maybe, let me hear another one. Can anybody think of another case? But if you can't, that's fine. At the end of the day though, using the example, and if you like, you can add another, but even just the one example, is enough for us to be able to state this definition more clearly now. So when one says the ends justify the means, you know, Nicole, for example, you wrote the right explanation. What then is an end, based on your way of putting it? When you say the outcome justifies what it took to get there, so which thing is the end, according to that analysis? Steal food to feed your family. There you go. That's another one, Ashley. Yeah. So suppose that you're really, really financially destitute, and there's a local vendor that maybe has food items that you could easily steal without maybe being caught, and you don't like the concept of stealing, but you're up against such dire straits that you think it's either theft or my family goes hungry tonight. So the ends justify the means. Another fair example. But good. So let me ask this question yet again, though. What is an end then? What's the definition of the word end based on examples like these and your own intuition? An end then is, in other words, what thing? Skip school to take care of your sick family member. Another fair example, Caleb, yes. So the person is going to be, you know, I guess either truant or give a, I don't know, a false reason why they can't be there, but they're doing it because they have a family member that's sick that really needs help. So the end justify the means. Okay, great, guys, but let's get into this. Tell me then the definition of the word end. Forget examples for a moment, and now let's go into definition world. What is an end? What's the definition of an end? Not a particular end, but the definition overall of the concept of an end. What is an end? Yes, the end is the goal. Exactly, Violetta. Thank you. So it's a goal or an objective. So that's easy enough to define. Ends are just goals. Now, what are means? In relation to the goals, the means are the what? So that's very good, guys. Yes, we got the end, and they are goals. So what does it mean then? Someone says ends justify the means. So the end is the goal. Means are the what then? By relation to the end. So like if the end was feeding my family and the means were stealing, well, means is not the motive, actually. The end is the motive. You know, the motive in the case of stealing was to feed the family. And feeding the family is the end. So it's the actions, that's right. It's the actions that you take or the methods that you take to achieve the goals or ends, whatever they are. So that's right, actions taken to achieve one's goals. Okay, so ends, the goals you're trying to get to, means the things that you do to get there. And so looking now back at this claim of Mill, the utilitarian, what he's saying we can understand better. It says that happiness or pleasure, that's the only thing that we're really looking at as a goal. That's the only thing we're seeking as a goal. In other words, just to put it bluntly, happiness and pleasure is the only goal that any of us have. Everything else in your whole life, if you want it, you only want it as a means to the real goal, which is happiness and pleasure. So if happiness or pleasure is the universal objective of every human action, then he thinks we already recognize the pursuit of happiness as our fundamental goal. Therefore, we recognize happiness as the good. So making more of it rather than less would seem to be the right ethical standard to live by. Okay. Now, if it didn't seem perhaps automatically intuitive to you that, like what he's saying here, that happiness or pleasure is the only objective of every human action, then let me try to make it plausible at least by going through a little illustration or dialogue with you. Okay, so I'm going to work off of what you're doing right now, because everything that a person does on purpose, deliberately, is done with some kind of goal in mind. So even right now, as you're watching this lecture, it's being done for some kind of motivation or reason or end, as they say. So let me ask you that. As you watch this lecture, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? What's the reason? What kind of goal are you in the pursuit of by even watching this lecture? You must have a reason for it. So what possible reason could you have for even watching this lecture right now? What is the end that is in mind? What is this lecture a means to? You watch this lecture as a means to get to what goal? I mean, what's your goal by watching this? Okay, so good, Nicole. To pass the class. That's a reasonable answer. I know that you want to pass. and that you attend this class to get the information and the notes that you think will help you do well. Okay, so you're attending and watching, taking your good notes and paying attention as a means to the end of passing class. But why do you want to pass the class? That by itself is not the final goal of your whole life. Passing this class will be nice, but it's only a means to other things. Why do you want to pass? So passing the class will itself be a means to a further end. What's the goal that you have in mind by passing this class? Why do you want to pass? Why do you want to pass? What's the reason for that? What will that lead you to, or what will that help you do? Why do you want to pass? Basic question. You may think it's inane, like, what? Come on, everyone knows why. But I'm asking you and you have to say it. So why do you want to pass? Okay, so Violetta, to move on to your upper division requirements or graduate. Okay, let's go with the graduation one. So we'll take it step by step again. You're attending as a means to pass, and you want to pass as one part of the larger goal of graduating. But why do you want to graduate college? That's the next question. Is that the last thing that you want in life? Once you graduate, you'll be standing there with a diploma like, oh my goodness, I don't even have anything left to do. This was it. No. Graduation is certainly a goal you have, but it's a means to even further things. Why do you want to graduate? I mean, come on, why do you want to graduate? What goal do you think that's going to help you get to? Graduation is a means to what end? We're almost there, but we're not quite done. We're getting to your final goal eventually, but we're taking it step by step. So why do you want to graduate? Okay, so you say, Veronica, to get a job. Okay. And why do you want a job? Is it just because you love the concept of labor? You just want to be put to work? Personally, I'd rather never have to work, but here we are. So you want a job, and you want a job, I'm assuming, as you put it, Veronica, because the job is a means to another goal. Why do you want a job? You want a job because the job gives you money, it gives you income. Okay, so let's take it back to the beginning and go through those steps again. You're attending this class as a means to passing it, and you want to pass it as a means to graduating. And then you want to graduate as a means to getting some kind of career or job, and you want to get that job as a means to income and wealth. But why do you want income and wealth? Okay, why do you want the income and wealth? Now, Veronica, you say to support the people you love. It's a noble thing to say, and I'm sure it's true. But in general, whether it's to support people that you love or to just have financial security, purchasing power for goods and services, what's the real reason that you want to have the ability to support your family and yourself? Why do you want to be able to do that? Why do you want to have purchasing power for goods and services? What's the money a means to the end of? Money and the accumulation of wealth is a means to what end? To what end? I mean, even if you say you want to support your family, why? Because what will that do? And you want to have purchasing power for goods and services and have financial security, but what's the reason that you want those things? Why do you want to have a happy family? Why do you want to have financial security? There's really only one answer. Let me hear it. You guys are very noble getting into the whole thing about your families. I would have just thought many people would have said, oh, I want to get money, and because then I have money, I can buy things. But whether it is to support others or just yourself, it's to live a comfortable life. What is a comfortable life? What's the word for a comfortable life? Isn't it a happy life that's pleasant? Sure it is. And if we get to that question, why do you want happiness? Now it is okay for you to sort of just shrug your shoulders and be like, I don't know, man, that's just a brute fact. Everyone just wants happiness. I mean, that's, in the end, we're all pursuing personal happiness. And if you also want to support other people, it makes you happy to do that, right? So it's also a part of your happiness when the people that you love are well taken care of and are doing well. So look at this whole picture starting from the beginning to the end. You take classes to pass them. You pass them as a means to graduating. You graduate as a means to getting a job. You get a job as a means to accumulating wealth and income. And you get that wealth and income as a means to personal happiness. And if I ask why you want happiness, there's no further question to ask, because it's like, just because that's what I am, a human being, and we all pursue happiness. So, and probably not just human beings, right? Other life forms, everything that's trying to tend to its own self-interest and advantage is in the pursuit of its own happiness, as it could be said. So now in the end, what Mill has claimed is that why not embrace utilitarianism, because we already seem to agree in our own lives that happiness is a worthy goal that we all pursue. So if happiness is the goal that I'm seeking, that you're seeking, and that everybody is seeking in their own right, then it seems like more happiness and pleasure rather than less is making the world better. So he just thinks, let's turn that into a moral theory and make the standard and a principle to live by, to always try and maximize the most happiness for as many people as possible. Now, I sometimes like to try and show you guys how to understand how the utilitarian theory could be applied to an actual scenario, just to sort of see the way that you make decisions and consider things according to this ethical system. So just to help you with that, I'm going to quickly have us draw a little graph. So here there's a box, and the box is going to have 4 vertical columns like this, and then crossed with 4 horizontal rows like that. So we see a grid of 16 boxes now. In the top 4 vertical columns, I'm going to put 4 different items of information here for each column. And what they're going to be are 4 different types of pizza topping. Okay, so you guys have all, I think, eaten pizza, and you know of the wide variety of possible styles of pizza in terms of toppings. So here from you, just let me hear some suggestions of different optional pizza topping varieties. Tell me one, if you can think of one right now. What's a well-known kind of pizza topping or pizza that people do order? This is easy, right? What do you think? What are some of them? Give me your greatest hits. Okay, pepperoni, that's easy enough. I see people starting with pineapple, but pepperoni came first and it has the letter P. So it may be easier for your notes and the visual to switch to another letter. So bacon, okay, Veronica. Pepperoni, bacon, what else? There's other types. We have 2 so far, letter P, letter B. And what's to add next? Just need 2 more. Okay, I see someone writing chicken, like the barbecue chicken type. Okay, Caleb, you're saying anchovies. Nice. Okay, so look, we got these 4. C standing for chicken, not cheese. Pepperoni, bacon, chicken, and anchovies. So 4 different types of pizza. Interesting choices too. Okay, so over here in the 4 horizontal rows, we're going to just have 4 students from our class that are willing to just tell us about your various preferences when it comes to these 4 possibilities. So, I mean, just let me know that you're willing to be asked some very simple questions about how you would rate the different pizzas there. So I need 4 students. Go ahead and let me know who will be willing to do this. And then I'll put your names up there. When we go back to face-to-face classes, in-class interactions, that's a little more awkward, I think, because, you're in the class, people looking at you, hearing your voice. On YouTube, it's not even Zoom. I mean, you're just in a live chat. So you should feel, I think, pretty comfortable engaging with this. But just do volunteer. Let me know. 4 people here. Simple questions. It's not like you're going to be put on the spot. I mean, we're talking about pizza, so go ahead, let me know. Okay, so Nicole, you're going to be 1. And Ghazi, you say as well. So here, Nicole, your name. Ghazi, here's you. And Ashley, thanks. Finally, one more. Roxana, okay, thank you. Okay, so look, guys, now we have this grid with these empty boxes to be filled in. Notice how each box assigns a coordinate between a type of pizza topping and a name. So like this box would stand for Ghazi bacon, okay? And in each of the boxes, we're going to place a number. The number is going to be a number between 0 and 50. Let's just have it that way to keep it within a relatively reasonable range. Now, what do you think the number is going to stand for? Well, I'll tell you this. The number is going to be like the person's rating, or you could call it pleasure score, of that topping selection. And so it's like, how much pleasure would you experience between 0 to 50 if this was the type of pizza that was chosen? So you know how sometimes, I don't know why, but it's like a meme almost, people like 10 for 10 would recommend, 9 for 10. This is out of 50, okay? And your rating will reflect your personal preferences and, tastes when it comes to different pizzas. So to people here, look at these 4 options and think right now, as I'm speaking, about what you would say between 0 and 50 for each of those 4. Now, if you like one better than the other, of course, that should be shown in the way you score it. So like if you like bacon better than pepperoni, then you would give it a higher number. If you like it a little bit more, then it's a little bit of a higher number. If you like it like twice as much, maybe the number is twice as much. So 50 is like my top value just to keep us within a set range. If you gave us a score of 50 on something, that's like you love this. It's a lot of pleasure for you. 0 would be like, I don't enjoy it at all. And anything in between would be all those shades of gray, okay? So are you guys ready? Let me just ask you some questions. Nicole, we'll start with you. So I'm just going to ask you for your 4 different, I don't know, scores, ratings, pleasure values of those 4. So you can let me know with like the letters P, B, C, and A. And so you should give me 4 different values right now, whenever you're ready, something between 0 and 50 for each of the 4. So we don't know, Nicole, what do you think about pizza? But you know, and you'll share it with us now. So let me hear pepperoni, bacon, chicken, anchovy. What are your 4 different values here? And to the other 3, get ready because you're going to come up next. But we'll start with you, Nicole, because you're at the top of the box. So what do you think? Just give us your views. We're all different. It's okay to be different. And you'll let me know. Okay, so here we go with Nicole. You say 50, 25, and then a couple of zeros. Okay, so you got some pretty strong disinterest in those. But over here, 50 and 25, you like those 2 decently well. So for you, pepperoni is the best option available. It's the one that you like the most. If you had to go for a second possible choice, you sort of think bacon is okay, but not only half as much as pepperoni. And then chicken and anchovy, I guess you're saying you don't find those pleasurable at all. Okay, good. Thanks, Nicole. Now we go to Ghazi. All right, Ghazi, let's hear it. What do you think about the 4 types? And what would be the score, the rating given to each one? Ghazi, okay, so you're saying 50, 0, 40, 0. Okay. Notice that there's a lot of zeros. You guys have some very passionate feelings about certain types of pizzas. So, I mean, if it's Nicole and Ghazi, you guys don't have chicken pizza together. One's going to love it, the other going to hate it. But that's great. Okay, so we see you. You're pretty much a fan of pepperoni. Chicken is good too, but you're not a huge fan of either of those. So, Ashley, now we come to you. Ashley, 4 different numbers for us. What do you think? Okay, here's Ashley. 50, 30, 20, 0. Okay, so Ashley's giving us 50, 30, 20, 0. Once again, pepperoni. You guys all just like pepperoni? It's like uniform opinion, I guess. You don't have to have the same views as others, but I guess that's just how it works out. It is, after all, one of the popular choices. So, yeah, to you, once again, pepperoni is your favorite. Then if you were going number 2 choice would be bacon, then chicken, and I guess anchovies getting no love, even though for me it's 50, 0, 0, 0. I do not like any of these things. I love anchovy, but that's just me. Okay, so now let's talk to Roxana. What do you think, Roxana? Go ahead, let me hear it. Okay, good, here we go. 40, 50, 10, and 0. Okay, so look, now we have every box filled. Thank you guys for helping out. And if we're going to do the right thing, quote unquote, as a utilitarian, then we would have to simply do a little math right now to make the right call. So which mathematical operation do you think must now happen to assess which of the 4 choices is the morally obligatory choice in this hypothetical scenario? We have to do what? There's a little math involved, and so what do you think is going to be the mathematical procedure here? Well, you say Ghazi average. That's one way, I guess, to do it. But I think rather, because in utilitarianism it says take the action which creates the greatest overall amount, then we'll use a sum. That's right. So we'll do addition. We're going to add vertically, and we'll have 4 totals at the bottom of each column. And the total number that's at the bottom is going to represent the total amount of pleasure that would be created if this was the choice of pizza for the whole group, right? So like the total amount that would be the byproduct of all their pleasures added together, okay? So like I was saying, Ashley, let's go with the sum total, the aggregate. All right, here, 50, 50, 50, 40, that's 190. This is already the winner, we know that, but let's just go through the rest. 50, 30, 80, 105. Okay, 40, 60, 70, and then 0, which is disappointing. Come on, guys, anchovy pizza. It's fish, but do you just not like fish itself? Anyway, I'm just being funny, but okay, back to this. So it's clear then, isn't it? What would be your moral obligation in this choice scenario? If you're one of these 4 people and you have to order, and there's no way to like split the pizzas in different, ways or anything, then there's a clear winner. The moral obligation relative to the situation here would be to order which topping. Just let me see. You can say it one time. We've reached the end of the example, and just let's bring it home. This shows that considering you 4 guys in this group, the right pizza choice, if these are the only 4 options, is clearly yes, pepperoni. And why? Because it dominates the other 3 choices in terms of generating more overall happiness than the others do. So if the goal is to always do the action which creates the most overall happiness, then this would be morally obligatory in this situation. And the other 3 toppings would be morally impermissible. Morally impermissible because they don't create as much happiness as this case does. Now, Roxana, I appreciate one thing that you did, which was, it's not like, it's just up to your preferences, so it's not like a moral thing that I'm commending you on, but it's convenient for me, I guess, that you had a different favorite, because this allows me to make this point. In this situation here, I guess 3 out of the 4 people are totally happy because, they got their favorite pizza, and it also happened to be the one that generates the most utility. For Roxana, it's not too big of a disappointment, I guess, because this is your second favorite, but actually you do prefer bacon over pepperoni. So you're slightly taking one for the team. But in utilitarianism, that happens a lot because it's not about doing the thing that just creates the most happiness for you, the one individual. It's always taking measure of the amount of happiness that would be generated for all affected, and whichever action would generate the most happiness for all affected. Even if it's not your number 1 preference personally, you'd be obligated to follow along into that action. Okay, now I gave you an example here, which is kind of in a way a trivial example. It's an example of choosing pizza toppings. It's not exactly life or death, war and peace. But if you were a utilitarian, okay, then the same kind of logical procedure and calculation would be involved in all decisions, even those that are big and that have a lot of consequences and impact. Suppose that you were a legislator in Congress or something, and a bill comes before you. Like, say the bill says, should we legalize marijuana or not federally? This bill could actually come up in the next congressional term. But anyway, suppose you're that legislator. Now the bill is here, and the choice for you is vote yes or vote no. If you were a utilitarian legislator, you would try and estimate what would be the probable consequences for total human happiness for all members of society if the bill was either put into law or defeated. And based on whichever outcome you thought would be more optimistic in terms of generating more total happiness for each society, and that would dictate what your vote ought to be. And so utilitarians would always be doing that. They would always be making forward-looking estimations of how much total happiness each different action could generate, and then they would simply try to select the one in accordance with the principle that it should be the one that generates the most utility overall. The terminology that is sometimes used to the one action that dominates the others is the word optimific. So this is like the optimific choice in this situation because it does yield more utility than the others. But this is always context specific. If you have a different group of people, pescatarians or people like me or something, then there's going to be a whole different range of pleasure values associated. And even if we're not going to be busting out our calculator all the time, doing that like really in a precise mathematical way, the utilitarian would still advise you to take some estimation or gain some general sense of the total happiness that would be produced for each action and try to act that way in accordance with the rule of utility. So utilitarianism has some support, but there are also critics. Some people say that it tolerates actions that should be completely forbidden just as long as they generated the most utility. So sometimes it allows for the commission of so-called necessary evils if the alternative is even worse. Like suppose that you kill one person and you take all their organs to save 5 others that need transplants. Maybe that saves more lives than sparing the one human being, but it's also the murder of an innocent person. And so you would think this is wrong. It doesn't matter how much utility we get from it. Or maybe if you torture someone to get information to like disrupt a terrorist plot, some people will say, well, that results in more overall happiness. But other people would say it's a violation of the rights of the one person. So we shouldn't do it, regardless of the utilitarian reasons in favor of it. Okay, Now, another ethical universalist theory, and I'm going to have to make pretty short work of this, obviously, because we're coming to the end, but a different look at this would be the work of this man named Emmanuel Kant. Now, Emmanuel Kant is a German philosopher who lived from 1724 to 1804. And he has a different viewpoint on morality. From him, the idea is not that you're supposed to just try to act in the way that creates the most total happiness. In his view, instead, you should just try to act to uphold the moral law with a good will. And if you do that, then you're acting with a good intention. And as long as you act with a good intention, then your act is moral, even if no kind of good consequences result, or even if it backfires and doesn't lead to the right results. So utilitarianism is all about the consequences, and they don't care about the intentions. In utilitarian theory, if you intended to do something good, but it ended up hurting people, then they would say, well, that was wrong because the results were not the best overall for human happiness. For Kant, though, the consequences don't really matter, but the intentions do. So from Kant's viewpoint, if you had a well-intended act, you did it with a good will, but somehow your good intentions backfired and negative consequences happened. Like you tried to move someone from the scene of an accident thinking that you were helping them, but you actually caused them to break their neck because you didn't properly immobilize them with a backboard. A utilitarian would say, well, by moving them, you've now caused their paralysis. So that was not good, and it was worse. The fact that you did it then was bad. Kant would say, well, it was bad consequences, but you had the best of intentions, and so you still acted in a way that was moral. So it's a different standpoint. Now, Kant says that if you want to act morally, act with a good intention, and that involves trying to live up to the moral law, to act to uphold the moral law, which he thinks is universal and objective, and that reason can discover it. Now, when we use reason to discover the moral law, and then we try to act to uphold it, regardless of the consequences, Kant says that we will discover it when we think of this principle that he calls the categorical imperative. So like the key sort of linchpin that holds together all of Kant's ethics is this thing that he calls the categorical imperative. So I have to put that here and quickly explain it. Okay, so the categorical imperative, there are two different versions of it. Here's version 1. And to be fair, it looks a little technical at first, but I'll try my best to explain some of the complicated features of it. It just says this: act always so that the maxim, which describes your action, could be willed to be a universal law. Okay, so to really understand this, we have to just think about what the word maxim is and what it would mean for a maxim to be able to be a universal law. Okay, so, and by the way, Kant's ethics is sometimes just called Kantianism, named after him. Now, I'm going to erase his name and the date up here of his life. And let's see, what is a maxim? Okay, so a maxim is just an individual's personal principle of action behind something that they do. It's like your own policy statement. And it takes the form of, I will do a certain action under certain circumstances. So the form of a maxim is like a little policy statement which takes this generic structure. I will do some action X in certain circumstances, which we could just call C. And I'm leaving the labels X and C as just these variables because they're supposed to stand in general for whatever the given action or circumstances might be. I will do X in circumstances C. Now, when you try to question whether that could be a universal law, you have to consider what it would be like to upgrade it into a universal law. So it just becomes a universal statement. And then it has this form. All people will do that action X in the same circumstances C. Okay, so to understand whether you're doing something moral or immoral, whether you're doing something that violates to a universal law, or if it was, would that be impossible or undesirable? So like as an example right now, let me give you my own case. The current action that I'm doing, as you know, is I'm delivering a philosophy lecture for this critical thinking class at Fullerton, Cal State. And so my maxim, because I'm doing this on purpose, is like this maxim. I will give the lecture when I am scheduled to do it according to my contract, okay? Now, if that was a universal law, then it would be this statement. All professors will give their lecture at the scheduled time according to their contract. Now, if that was the universal law, there would be no problem with that. That would just mean that all professors are holding their duly appointed classes at the scheduled times, which I'm sure you guys would appreciate because it means that there's consistency and that there's predictability. Maybe I could have added one little clause to eliminate some concerns you might have, like what if I was unhealthy or injured or something. So I could rephrase the maxim as, I will hold class when I am able to at the scheduled time according to my contract. And then again, the universal law is all professors, when they are able, will hold class at the scheduled time according to their contract. So that passes the test of the universal law. It is something that is within the bounds of the moral law according to the categorical imperative. But the interesting cases to consider are actions that fail this test and are therefore ruled impermissible by the moral law. So take another case. Suppose that I want to cut in line because I'm in a long line and I'm getting impatient waiting towards the back. If I cut, take a position closer to the front and skip into the front, then my maxim would be I will cut a line when there is a long line. But if that was into a universal law, it would say all people will cut a line when the line is long. And that cannot be made into a universal law because it would destroy the line itself. If everybody was cutting all at the same time, then there would no longer be any single file line, just a mob of people at the front. Furthermore, the cutter, him or her, they don't even want everybody to do the same thing. Because if 100% of people cut, then as soon as they cut, everyone would cut in front of them and there would have been no point to it. So what the cutter actually wants is for everybody else, except for them, to follow the typical rule of not cutting so that when they do it, they can exploit everyone else who's following the rules by taking advantage of them. So we know that it's wrong because it's an action that can't be done by everybody. So in a way, simply stated, the categorical imperative is just saying that it's only okay to do actions that would be possible and not undesirable for everybody to do also. So if you're thinking of doing something, but it's not something that everybody could do, then you know it's wrong and that's against the moral law, so you should stop it. Like if you're going to take a free ride on the subway and not pay the toll and you just jump over the turnstile, then your maxim would be, I will take a free ride on the subway when I ride on it. But if that was the universal law, it would mean that all people will take a free ride on the subway when they ride, which would deprive the subway of any funding and therefore service would have to be stopped, in which case there could no longer be any free rides for anybody. So even the one that's taking the free ride, the free rider, they don't want 100% of people to do what they're doing because they recognize it would eliminate the service that they're taking advantage of. So again, you see a case where it's wrong to do it because it could not be done by everybody at the same time. All right, so that's categorical imperative. If you wanted to think about ethics from a different angle, not just trying to always generate the most happiness, but just follow a set of moral rules that your reason can discover by contemplating this concept, then that would be a different way of looking at it for you. I told you there's two versions of the categorical imperative, but we only have time for the one, so we're just going to leave it at that. Now, after talking about Kant, there's just a few last things I want to say, and they're also from chapter 9. So a couple of other important moral concepts that are sometimes put at the center stage of ethics is like rights. And people say there are two types of rights. So on the one hand, we have what are called liberty rights. And on the other hand, there's what's known as welfare rights. Now, liberty rights are supposed to be rights to be left alone to pursue your legitimate interests, okay? Rights to be left alone to pursue your legitimate interests. Welfare rights, these are rights to be provided certain things if you can't provide them on your own, which are considered necessary. So rights to be provided certain essential goods if you cannot provide them for yourself. Okay, so let me ask you some questions based on these two concepts that you see on the board. Which kind of right do you think would be the freedom of speech? Freedom of speech, the right to say what you want without government interference or shutting down your act of speech. This would be which type of right? Liberty or welfare? Freedom of speech. It's got to be one of them. I think you can guess. It's a liberty right, correct, because it does not involve being given anything. It just means non-interference. So people may not, or the government anyway, may not restrict your freedom of expression politically or otherwise. So that's a liberty right. What if I say you have a right to food and water? Well, spoiler alert, it's a welfare right, because that involves the right to be actually provided with certain essential goods if you're not otherwise able to get them for yourself. So welfare right is a right to be actually given certain things when you're not able to provide them. And there are other welfare rights that we all enjoy, like say the right to police and fire protection. That's something that we can't necessarily provide for ourselves, or military protection. And so there must be a system established to provide that for us. Education, if you don't have the ability to fund like a private education, then we have to establish a public school system to give people education if we think they have a right to that. Or healthcare, some people say is the welfare right. If you can't secure your own insurance, then there should be a nationalized healthcare system. Liberty rights, other ones, right to bear arms. That's not giving you a gun, but saying that you shouldn't be interfered with if you do own one. Freedom of religion, another liberty right. That just means that you may not be interfered with as you practice the religion of your choice. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to say to you is this, the word virtue. This is the last thing to know from our whole class. Virtues are just desirable character traits, the sort of character traits that people praise on a moral basis when they praise your character. So a desirable character trait. And some people say the best way to think about ethics is to simply try to build up all these virtues in your own character. So let me give you some examples. They're like the subject matter of moral compliments. Suppose that you had a son or a daughter, or you are the son or daughter, and someone's praising you and saying, you know, I'm really proud of you because I can tell that you turned into a good person because you are honest, or because you are generous, or because you are patient, you know, or because you are brave. Maybe it is because you are dedicated. So any kind of like good, positive character trait descriptions fit into the realm of virtue. And some people think that when you're trying to live a good moral life, the best you can do is to try and display and exhibit these virtues. How do you do that? Well, I guess it starts by trying to imitate the behavior of those that are held forth as paradigms of virtue, and then until it becomes second nature, and then you become one of those examples that other people start to follow. So that's about it, everyone. We've had the last crash course on ethics today. So I'm glad that we got through all the notes. But I will send off the study guide in the next day, pretty much today, I think, and then you can get started looking back at all the different topics from the semester, and we'll take the whole week next week to get ready for the final. So let me then just close the stream, but let's hear from you that that's okay and that you're good to go. Once you say so, then I'll close it, and you can just have a nice weekend, and we'll be in touch if you need anything through email. So are we all right? Okay, thanks then. Thanks again, and take care, everybody. I'll talk to you soon, and we'll be in touch on Tuesday, if not before. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.